Hello and welcome to the Utopia Radio for the 1989th time, and welcome to the 31st century. Alright, enough of that. As we have finally reached the point in humanity's existence where everything is perfect and we have everything figured out, I think we can finally relax and stop asking questions about important subjects because we have definitely figured them all out. Or have we? We may have answered the more important questions about politics and world peace, but how about the less important things that cannot be solved due to different opinions? How about the way we see our entertainment? Yes, some people see it as mindless escapism, but some people see it as much more. So with that in mind, I would like to bring up the subject, are video games art? And of course, to answer this, we would need to also answer the question, why are they not art? Or at the very least, try to understand why people look at video games in that way. Now, there are a lot of games that can be seen as mindless entertainment and nothing more. The Call of Duty games, for example, are not going to be seen as much more than mindless entertainment, and its aesthetic is not the most visually inspired. But what about games like Muramasa Rebirth or Velocity? Even games like World of Warcraft, you may see it as just terrible graphics, but the truth is they did update the graphics recently, and yes, it does look mostly the same, but the style has become so iconic to the series, they chose to keep it the same cartoony look it always has had. My point is that it is an artist's decision to choose their style. Can it not also be the decision of the developer to choose the style of their game? Now, if I'm honest, my opinion on this has changed slightly since the making of this. Originally, I was for the idea that art can be connected to the video games, but video games cannot be art. Going back to Muramasa, the game has a wonderful visual art style, but I saw it as just the background and the foreground, and the game would work just as well without it. But the fact is, it really wouldn't work as well. Without the style, the game would not have anywhere near the amount of awe that comes with it. Another thing that people look for in art is whether the art style says something relevant or is trying to convey something. In this case, Muramasa isn't really trying to convey much. It's much simpler than that. The art style is simply trying to mimic that of a more traditional Japanese painting, and it works very well, and adds more than it does subtract from the game experience. I changed my opinion on this subject when I played two games, those being Tales from the Borderlands and The Unfinished Swan. To explain why something like Tales from the Borderlands changed my mind about video games, I would need to talk about another type of media, movies. When movies like Citizen Kane and The Godfather came out, movies became a lot more than just entertainment, telling a fantastic story that possibly says something about the world and the characters themselves. This got me thinking about games that try to be more like movies, games that could be thought-provoking and could say something about society, games like Bioshock Infinite, or even the simpler games like Fallout 3. Tales from the Borderlands may not be saying anything relevant about society. I mean, I don't know many people in real life who say things like this.
Sorry, I realize this is rude, but I really don't like your face.
No, I get that a lot.
Not one bit.
But it does show the same capabilities that movies have, only with a possible edge over them, and that edge is choice. A game that lets the story change completely, often changing the ending and how you progress through the story, is using its capabilities as an interactive experience to the fullest. The unique interactions between the player and the game is something not many other art forms can capitalize on. Yes, there are some pieces of art where the viewer's input changes the visuals, or that some people see it differently than others, but that's not the point of every single piece of art, whereas video games, that's the entire point. Even if it's a simpler choice like where to go next. A game like Skyrim is a game that gives you a huge amount of freedom. You can choose your own adventure, whether you want to continue following the story as it progresses, or go off on your own finding new places to explore. This is something movies can't really use, as it is a linear progression from start to end that is meant for everyone sitting down and watching it to understand the story as it is being told. Whereas video games, it's for the individual player, whether it be multiplayer or single player, to choose their own path and do what they want to do with the game. As for The Unfinished Swan, well, that really goes back to the argument that video games do not need the art in the background. A game like The Unfinished Swan takes a completely different approach to the making of video games. Usually the background, the aesthetic, the graphics is not the key focus of any game, it's the mechanics. However, in this video game, the mechanics of the game is the background. The player has to throw paintballs at thin air in order to reveal hidden objects and the background. If you took the background away from this game, it wouldn't be a game anymore. For a less literal example of background art, perhaps you should consider a game like The Last of Us. Although I personally dislike it, the dystopian environment the players can explore gives the player an impression of what has happened here. It tells the story without the need for exposition. This may seem like basic storytelling, but if you think about the fact that you could have easily missed something along the way, some nameless character retelling their own story, it may give you some insight into the place you are in. Nostalgia Critic believes that video games, if not already, can become art in the same way that movies became art. And I find myself on the same boat. When the first films came out, they were perceived as nothing more than entertainment. Well, actually they terrified people, but that wore off eventually. And if you look at the changes of films over the years, you may start to realise that the evolution of this to this is not that much different from the evolution from this to this. I'm not saying that video games are art now, as it is a young form of media, and is still trying to perfect itself at the very moment. But at the very least, try to remain open-minded about the possibilities that it could be art very soon. Anyway, I believe it is time for question time, so phone lines are open. Feel free to ask any question. And we have our first caller. What is your question for me?
Hello, you mentioned Muramasa Rebirth when talking about whether games can be art. But can a game that solely relies on the backgrounds truly be art?
A good question. Although the game has the most stunning visuals of any game I personally have ever seen, its charming, calming style does not connect well with the profanity in the story. The colourful, cartoony look mixed with the almost profane story takes away from the immersion of the game. Whereas a game like Borderlands, with its semi-cartoony, semi-realistic look, makes way for its silly yet violent nature. The visuals don't take away from anything, but rather adds to it. Again, still not saying anything about reality.
All around the stack this plant, the stalker chased the bandit. The stalker thought 'twas all in fun. Hop! Goes the bandit.
Hi. So, if films are like art now and video games are trying to be more like films, does that just make games like films light?
A good point, but as I have said, the video game industry is an evolving market and has the best opportunity to become more than just that through things that films and other art forms can't capitalise on, such as choice.
When do you think games are going to be art? Would it be soon, or are we not quite there yet?
I can't say where we are right now, but I think if people see it as art, then there is more of a chance of it becoming art in the future, which is in turn will hopefully make way for better games. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today, and remember, it's the 31st century, bring back the music.